Dr. Blix, thank you very much for making yourself available. I'd like to start out just by asking you about the report that has been just released by the IAEA. I presume you've had a chance to look at it, and I wonder, does this, in your view, represent in any way a justification for military action?
No, absolutely not. I'll tell you what I think is significant about the report first. I do not see that there are any remarkable new data given. We have heard about many of the much of the information that has come into the IAEA over the last few years from intelligence agencies, and some of them figure here. Until now, the agency's attitude has been, I think, rightly to welcome intelligence from various countries, and they say now it's about 10 countries, but they have not espoused them. They have not sort of made them their own, but rather said that these raise questions. And that is legitimate, I think. This time they have said that we are comparing what we have received from intelligence with what we have ourselves through our safeguards inspections and observations, and what we have got from the keinen network. They don't mention it by name, but that's understood. And as we assess these things together, we find an overall picture of credibility. Now, that is not perhaps endorsing every piece of intelligence they received, but the overall impression is one under which they say there are actions by Iran which are activities that would be relevant for the development of a weapon, and there are other activities which they can see is relevant for nothing but producing a weapon. So this is how far they've gone. It's relatively cautiously formulated. They are not saying that we assert, we conclude that they are going to produce a weapon because Iran is not there yet. And, of course, the last stretch, whether they will make a weapon, is a question of political will. And they do not pretend to know that that will is there. Now, already this conclusion of the assessment, of course, is a new thing. They have not done so before. And that is what I think was being discussed. But one needs to read rather carefully to see that the agency is not asserting that they are making a weapon.
The Russians and in particular Foreign Minister Lavrov earlier today basically said that since the IAEA is placing increasing reliance on intelligence provided by member states, he's called for the IAEA to, for the first time, be specific about which countries are making which allegations. And I wonder what your thinking is in terms of the member states' allegations. We've been there before with the Iraq case, which you very eloquently described in your book, Disarming Iraq. Do you see the rhetoric being in sync with the actual evidence in the report?
It may be that they have received information on condition that they do not reveal the source. But I think they would do well in being very circumspect in judging this evidence. We know from Iraq, as you remember, that famous case was the alleged contract between Iraq and Niger for the import of uranium oxide, and that proved to be a forgery. And we have in this case a famous part has been talked much about in the past about a computer that I think was stolen or it was found, and when it was examined it contained material which suggested that there was work going on to make a missile sufficient to carry a nuclear weapon or a nuclear device of some kind. Now this one, we've heard about that for a long time. It sounded like James Bond. And I do not know whether the agency's assessment of the various pieces, whether it's a correct one or not. I hope that they have been prudent and cautious, but I did notice that one piece of information that they gave in the report, namely that there had been a foreigner active and assisting in Tehran regarding high-level explosions, that this was contradicted from Moscow. The report does not indicate that it was a Russian, but in Moscow, they have a Russian have turned up, and he said, I was in Tehran, and I lectured on explosions, but not explosions that had regard to the production of diamonds, and he denied that he had anything to do with the military program, the nuclear military program. Well, the main point that I have made is that there is a tremendous attention to two things. One is, are they making a bomb? And the other one is, shall we bomb?
Yes.
And to me, the more interesting question is, what should the world do about what the agency is reporting and seeing? Then we get into the first preliminary question, should Iran be bombed? And I'm saying absolutely not. I think, first of all, it would be illegal, for one thing. Iran is not threatening anybody. They don't have a record of aggression or a record of expansionism. They suffered horribly during a war with Iraq for a long time. So there is not any sign of aggression. There are statements from Ahmadinejad and others which are totally unacceptable, yes. But I don't think that they are actually threatening. There's no imminent threat to anybody else. So that's so much for the legal thing. The other argument against, there are many, many arguments against a bombing. And the first one is that you could have terrible consequences in the Middle East. The Iranians are not going to sit there and twiddle their thumbs. And you can have belligerent developments in the Gulf, in the Red Sea, in the Persian Gulf, with mining. The Iranians have friends in Gaza, they have friends in Lebanon. So no one knows where a starting of a military event would lead. And certainly, if the Israelis and others don't know where all the installations are in Iran, so some would presumably be left. And if the Iranians had not made up their mind earlier to go for nuclear weapons, I think that an attack from the outside would probably lead to this. In addition, you would have a country where there are many different views on this matter and much criticism of the government, and I'm sure they would all unite in a united front if they're being attacked from the outside. So I don't see any. I see many horrible possible consequences of an attack. Now, if one rules that out, then others will say, but look, the negotiations haven't given you anything. It hasn't. They have tried to get the Iranians to suspend the enrichment program, and that they haven't done so, and there have been various sanctions, and that hasn't led to anything. And this is true, but I think one will have how many people know actually what has been offered to the Iranians in this situation. The outside world could also come up with more things. If you want to criticize the outside world for not getting results, we could see what else could they do. Well, compare what the outside world has suggested to North Korea, and you find that North Korea is offered guarantees that they will not be attacked from the outside, and I think also guarantees that there will be no subversion inside. Now, that has not, to my knowledge, been offered to the Iranians, and that would be an important element. The U.S. has not had diplomatic relations with Iran since 1979, since the occupation of the embassy. Again, that could also be something valuable that would be weighed in a cost-benefit analysis. There could be other things if you exercise your imagination. There's been blocking the idea of a pipeline from Iran through Pakistan to India. Well, again, that would be something that could be offered in a negotiation in return for a suspension of the enrichment program. So this is one important chunk of considerations that are not much discussed in the press, where they only discuss bombing or not. What gives me a little optimism is that I don't think that at the depth of it, Iran has a need for nuclear weapons. When you look at history, states mostly acquire nuclear weapons for perceived security interests. India, Pakistan, India, China vis-à-vis Russia and the United States and so forth. Also perhaps for acquiring status. It's a great power status. If you're a pariah or pointed to as a pariah, maybe you would like to demonstrate a nuclear weapon. But perceived security is the most important. And I think that's relevant, and I think it is wise of the West of the U.S. to say to the North Koreans that we will, if you do away with your nuclear program, we are willing to guarantee that there will be no attacks from the outside and no subversion from the inside. And I think Iran, too, that is treated as a pariah, and that was called part of the axis of evil, that they would also feel a need for such assurances, not least after the U.S. had their aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf. I would say about the Obama administration, I think they have been much more sensitive to that. I don't hear so often said that all options are on the table, although they have stiffened the rhetoric a bit after the Qom affair, when it was revealed that Iran had a second enrichment site. You know, when you say that all options are on the table, it's about the same as saying, I'd hate to shoot at you, but I can't exclude I'll do it.
Right, exactly.
And if I sat in Tehran or in North Korea or heard that, I think I would be worried. But then all the more important that they go to the table with the Iranians and say, we don't like your regime. No one in the Western world is enthusiastic about the police regiment that they have, etc. But we are not going to touch that. That's for you, for your people to deal with that.
There's been a series of visits by U.S. officials, the most recent Defense Secretary Panetta, to Israel, warning the Israelis not to act preemptively without consultation in advance. But nobody at this point is confident, it seems, that Israel will not take some kind of unilateral action, knowing full well that they don't have the capacity to wipe out the Iranian program. The bet seems to be that if Israel launches an action, the United States, confronted with a choice between siding with Israel or siding with Tehran in an election year, will back Israel and essentially come in and finish the job. How serious a danger do you see of this thing erupting into a war, given the fact that, as you've said, this will not be a limited or contained war and has all kinds of unforeseen consequences?
Well, I don't think I would dare to be 100% sure that the Israelis would not do something, but the way in which they've gone about this publicity, I think, is a little intriguing. I mean, there was practically a description about the discussions in the Israeli cabinet and how many was in favor and how many was against, and then there was a discussion about how could this leak to the media. I mean, one certainly could believe that they make use of the IAEA report in order to say, let's see how threatened we are, and we must think of an attack. But they know that the outside world does not want it, and the second best would then be a stiffening of the sanctions, adding some further sanctions, maybe a way of increasing the pressure. But one cannot be 100% certain. I mean, they did destroy the Iraq reactor in 1981, and they bombed the Syrian reactor that was claimed to be of North Korean design in 2007. So one cannot be, I feel absolutely calm about this issue. But I think one only has to argue with Israelis that, look, it's easy to take a dramatic step, but where does it lead you? I mean, it may not be anything that's very helpful for them. They are fairly isolated now with the policy of the settlements on the West Bank, and the Arab world around them is not going to be more positive to them if they attack Iran. So I think there are many good arguments for them to stay away, but I wouldn't bet my head or my hand on how they will behave.
Final question, if you don't mind. One of the people internationally who's been very vocal about the need to take dramatic action against Iran. I don't know that he's used the word regime change or military action, but as former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who in hindsight played a pretty significant role in the lead up to the Iraq War, and he has very strong access to President Obama. In fact, they met at the White House last week, and I think, as you indicated, there's some shift in the rhetorical line coming out of the United States, and the president clearly is aware of pressure from his re-election concerns to basically side with Israel in the event of some kind of action. I wonder what your thinking is.
Well, I think that the joint philosophy of Blair and Bush in the Iraq War did not really add much pleasure to the world.
Yes.
And so I hope that the same philosophy will not transpire by osmosis from Blair to Obama. When you listen to what the government say, Blair is not in government any longer. I mean, he lost because of his very much because the British public resented his action in Iraq. But when you listen to the French and to the Germans today, they are explicitly opposed to military action. The Cameron, I think, is less clear what he would do. He hasn't explicitly opposed it. But when you see what happened in Iraq, you can find that the British Foreign Office and the civil service and the public, they were highly skeptical to military action. And Blair went ahead with it for a variety of reasons, and some idealistic, I think, because Blair took the view that the great powers it was good if they did away with terrible dictators. Well, if the Security Council decides that in the case of genocide, then I also understand it. But I don't like the idea of great power sitting there and taking decisions who is odious and who is sufficiently odious to be slaughtered by them.